A very good afternoon to all of you. I'm Ankita Chauhan from NASSCOM Product Council, and today we are initiating a new series on product management with an introductory session by an industry stalwart who has vast experience in product development, product management, and product marketing. Let me introduce all of you with Ram Narayanan, VP and Managing Site Director R&D at VMware India. He is a global leader and has been an advisor to enterprises, large and small, in the arena of digital transformation, product strategy, and product marketing. Prior to joining VMware, he served in global leadership positions at eBay, Yahoo, and Microsoft. Ram will share his knowledge and experience in product management and marketing in the age of digital transformation. This session will have a dedicated Q&A slot for 40-45 minutes and will give ample opportunity to ask questions. I also have Tejaswita Shrestha, Product Management from Optum, who will be assisting us in the session. Please write your questions and we will take up most of them, keeping the time limit in mind. Welcome, Ram, and thank you so much for taking out time to interact with all of us today.
Thank you, Ankita. Thank you, and good afternoon, and welcome to everybody for joining the webcast. I'm really honored to be here to kick this off for a 2019 series, even though we are towards the end of the year of 2018, and that too with a topic that is actually close to my heart. And the reason that I'm talking about the role of product management and marketing in the age of digital transformation is because it's and I will set up a few slides to walk you through why I think so. But I think the role of a product manager and that of a product marketing manager is getting even more critical nowadays than it ever used to be. And let's get into that and come back and discuss this as a group. So just to set some context on what's happening with digital transformation. I mean, all of us are touched by it in some way or the other. And if you look at the numbers, it's starting to prove that. For example, by 2022, 60% of global GDP will be digitized. Now that's a massive number if you put that in context compared to what's been happening even for the last 10 years. And almost 7 trillion of that would be IT-related spending between 2019 and 2022. And this is global numbers, of course, but still an incredible achievement if you think about the global GDP itself getting digitized at 60%. Now, beyond that, if you look by 2023, 75% of all IT spending will be on third-party platforms, platform technologies, not necessarily built in-house, but also integrating interesting technology areas, like AI and ML and a lot of other new areas that are emerging to create solutions which are driving the GDP digitization that we talked about before. The third area is the fact that, what started at the cloud started off in the data center. By 2022, though, 40% of the organizations would have stretched their cloud deployments all the way to the edge. And not just covering endpoints, but also bringing in analytics and AI and ML to the edge. The other point is the fact that digital innovation explosion. So think about between 2018 and 2023, almost 500 million logical new applications would have been created, which is equal to the total number of apps built over the last 40 years. Now that's a very staggering number, and we'll again talk about what is actually driving a lot of these kinds of the application explosion, if you may. And last but not least is the fact that AI is expected to cover 30% of all screen-based, what is today's screen-based applications would be converted to AI-based interfaces by 2024, some of which will have an interaction with the user, but a large chunk of them may not have an interaction with the user, but nobody will notice the difference between what's going on there. So looking beyond that, if you just look at India, for example, we have 141 listed billion-dollar enterprises in India alone, which are expected to invest $380 million by 2020 towards advanced technologies. And this is 3x of what it was in FY17. And it's not just private sector. I mean, private sector obviously will dominate a lot of the spend. But if you look at the government sector and public sector, as you may, a large chunk of the spend of that of what is happening is actually coming from government as well, because a lot of initiatives, as we know, in India is starting to become digitized. From fintech to healthcare to a lot of other areas which are starting to emerge. So digital transformation is kind of sweeping through industry and government, even in India. Now, if you look at digital engineering spend, so these are spend on building new infrastructure and applications. If you look across industries, and these are global numbers, if you looked at, in 2018, if the spend from, by 2023, the spend is expected to increase from about $293 billion across industries to $642 billion. Now, that's a massive amount of money, and this includes what I talked about earlier, which is about $7 trillion of overall spend that is expected to happen in this space. And if you look at the growth rates, obviously software and internet is obviously growing, which we know. But if you look at other sectors where digital engineering is growing really fast, I mean, things like BFSI, telecom, areas like automotive, media and tech, right? Retail. Now, all of these are healthcare. These are massive areas, big transformations happening, huge disruption happening in the space to the advent of technology. So it brings us to the point about the fact that leveraging digital transformation to drive value across the board. It means not just digital in terms of technology rollouts, it also means business transformation. Companies are changing, they're changing their processes, their customers are changing, they're changing their entire way they're doing their business. Software-enabled infrastructures and applications are going to be very key at delivering business value. So I don't think there's any industry or government today that looks upon technology as a side spend, right? It is becoming the core around which businesses will operate or continue are starting to operate. That is delivering key business value and future growth for a lot of these organizations. And the AI, as it moves from the forefront, is moving to the forefront through this whole digital transformation work that is going on. And if you look at typically, if you double click on the digital transformation as a whole, now there are various definitions of digital transformation. But if you look at really the crux of what is going on, right, there are about 5 things that are actually starting to come up. One is the fact that driving innovation is starting to reframe customer experience. And we are all being touched by this, right? I mean, in the sense that even 5-6 years ago, nobody would have thought that you would be able to order a car off your phone and order food off your phone and have it delivered to where you are rather than you having to go find your modes of transportation of food. Now, this is just a small example, but there are sweeping changes happening in the customer experience that sometimes we notice and sometimes we are not even noticing. But the thing is that every business and enterprise is now starting to think about how to engage their customers with new experiences and wow experiences. The second big area, which is not as visible externally, is driving operational efficiency. Because the business processes are changing and the way they engage with customers and how you make money and monetize is changing. A lot of these factors are starting to drive a lot of operational efficiency within the organizations to cut cost, streamline processes, and also to bring those new experiences to life. You need to move away from a very siloed architectures of organizations that used to exist to much more horizontal and cross-cutting and following the customer journey through the organization. The third big area is new business models. Like I mentioned, digital is driving the next wave of growth for a lot of companies. Even traditional enterprises are going through a lot of fundamental changes in how they think about their business models and value that they derive out of engaging with their customers and driving operational efficiency within their organizations. Now, this puts a very different spin on what is needed from a people perspective. A lot of traditional enterprises are starting to build digital engineering teams, which is not necessarily their forte, right? If you're a manufacturing organization or if you're a bank, building technology teams is not something that they have done in the past. And most of the organizations are going through a lot of fundamental change in not just figuring out what to do with existing employees in the new paradigm, but also how to bring in new skill sets into the organization and make it emerge back into the culture of the organization that is existing. And now that's not easy to do. And that has resulted in, for example, from India perspective, you see a large number of MNCs, which are traditional enterprises and legacy enterprises, starting innovation centers in India for hiring new digital skills that doesn't exist in their organizations in other parts of the world. And last but not least is the infrastructure upgradation. To drive the next generation of digital requires a massive infrastructure upgrade, not just within the data centers like I talked about or cloud, but also at the edge. And how to make all of this work securely and at scale is a massive challenge in front of everybody. So the reason that I'm bringing this to the fore is when we talk about digital skills. Now, if you've been working in software industry, this comes naturally to you if you're a product manager or a product marketing manager. The fact that the product management and marketing is the crux of the product strategy and the rollout of new experiences and new business models for the company. So if you're just to kind of set the stage for the next set of discussions that we would have, one, the product management and marketing functions, and I'm using this as a continuum rather than as two completely different functions that typically exist in in a lot of conversations. Because to me, I don't think it's an artificial separation, because at the end of the day, it's about a product life cycle from conceptual of understanding the opportunity all the way out to taking it to market, and then coming back and driving a roadmap through it. And the product management and marketing functions play a very critical role, starting with defining the opportunity, the product strategy, which involves investigating and selecting and defining the product to be built for what customers, what problems are you going to solve, and how will you solve it, to the actual execution of the product strategy of building out the digital applications, which is the development process, to product marketing, again taking it back out to market, which includes things like positioning of the product, messaging, pricing, SKU analysis, product launch, analyst relations, sales tools, bringing the sales force up, bringing the sales force up to speed, and then tracking the whole success and the metrics that are required to actually make the product successful in the market. So if you talk about the entire product lifecycle, the product managers and the product marketing management roles play a very critical role. And if I play it back, if you look at if I go back to this slide that talks about what is happening across industries, now this creates a massive opportunity and a challenge for product managers and product marketing managers around the world to actually make themselves relevant to what is happening through digital transformation, and hence the topic of the conversation today. So with that, I would like to open it up for Q&A, and we can continue the dialogue.
Thank you so much, Ram. I would like Tej to ask questions.
So meanwhile, I request the audiences to go ahead and type your questions. The first of the questions, which again is pretty relevant to what you've spoken, Ram. Where do you see the demand for product management professionals headed in 2019? Do you see any disruption causing a jump or changing the nature of skill set needed?
No, I think absolutely. I think the good news is that most product managers, if you're a practicing product manager, you're already in tune with what's happening in the market. I think I don't have to emphasize the fact that keeping yourself abreast of new market trends and new market technology changes that are coming up is the first fundamental starting point. And I think when I talk about areas like machine learning and AI, it's not so much about the pure technology of what it does. Of course, it's important to understand what the technology does, but it's really about the application of it. Where is it most relevant? Where is it likely to cause most amount of intervention in a positive direction if you use those technology, and how effectively do you bring it into your roadmap so that you're not disrupting your product cycles in a way in which it may come back and bite you. So one, I think in 2019 I look at 2019 as a watershed year to a large extent. What I mean by that is there's a lot of work already happening on the digital transformation front, right? Many companies have already been engaged on this, but things are starting to accelerate. I mean, we see that today, even in our own daily lives, the number of new applications and products that many of the enterprises that we engage with on a daily basis as consumers are starting to launch, and some of the pitfalls that comes with it. I mean, we've had an example recently of a major bank in India that launched a mobile application and within a week had to pull it down because it just didn't work, the new version, right? So I think a few things here. If you're an enterprise product manager and you haven't thought about the B2B2C angles of your products and your company's opportunities and how to handle that scale, that's one thing. Second thing is, if you've been working more internally, it's about really understanding what is the opportunities to reframe processes within the enterprise, to talk about operational efficiency that can be achieved within the company. So there are various things here, but what I would encourage everybody to do is to really understand in the context of the businesses that they work in, what is going on. The second thing is, be ready to take on a different role, right? I mean, if you've been in the software and internet industry, that maybe there's there's some massive opportunities that are opening up in industrial or in other areas, BFSI, that could make use of their skills quite effectively.
Okay, thanks, Ram. Again, a follow-up question from one of the participants. How do you see the role of development manager changing with this transformation happening? Or what are the changes they should bring in their mindset?
I think gone are the days when engineering is just about building the product. I think I would encourage all engineering managers out there and engineering folks, not just managers, but also the engineers themselves, the individual contributors, to really understand market trends, understand customers, what's driving them, keep an eye on what are technology trends that they need to be abreast of, and how that would effectively change the way that they are going to be working in the future in terms of technologies. Look at cloud and infrastructure changes that are coming up very rapidly. I mean, the software-driven infrastructure is a reality already, and it's accelerating. So the question is, if you're above that and you're building applications, how can it effectively work with both infrastructure as well as large big data and analytics and AI and ML effectively to bring that into their products from an engineering perspective.
Okay. Now, how to maintain that effective balance between being agile, focused on day-to-day activities, and long-term vision of the product? So how does a product manager manage both of them?
So I think there are, if you think about if they're operating in an agile methodologies, like you mentioned, I think one of the things is there needs to be themes that they're focused on rather than, while they're working on their sprint schedule. Right? So there are longer term themes and phases of the product that they need to be aware of in terms of what's coming, in the near term, medium term, and long term, and not lose sight of the end goal of what they're trying to achieve with their product. I think there'll be adjustments made during the cycle, but the ability to balance a long-term perspective and a very strong opinion on where the product needs to go with shorter-term decisions around features and if you're an agile, user stories that you're trying to achieve, and how is it moving the needle. The other piece is keeping an eye on the metrics. I mean, it's very critical to ensure that you are very clear about what you're measuring for the medium and long-term success of your product, and making adjustments based on data and not necessarily other factors that obviously any product manager has to deal with on a daily basis, including pressures that come from customers, from internal audiences like sales, and the management of the company.
Okay. So there's a question from the AI perspective. The issue with AI is the use cases, effectiveness of it, and training the product management community on this is a challenge. Now, how are you addressing this challenge?
So I think, first of all, I think there's plenty of material available out there, whether it's self-learning or there are more organized classes. I think there are a couple of things in that question, if I may, right? I mean, let's parse that out. One is, what are the effective use cases where AI or machine learning needs to be brought in that would make it most effective for the product? And I think that's going to be very dependent on what you're trying to solve. Obviously AI and ML doesn't necessarily lend itself well for every use case. So you need to be quite judicious in thinking through where is it that you will get an inordinate and non-linear change in terms of either user effectiveness in using your product or the product's own ability to operate better, by utilizing data. And obviously data has to be available. Now, you could be working on a product where there isn't just sufficient data to work with. And then you have to take a very close call on where does AI and ML really help you in that instance. The second part of that question was, how do you train yourself, right? How do you get familiar with these technology areas? Now, if you're a product manager, I think there's plenty of material available out there that talks about, one, understanding the technology itself. How do you think about the technology? And also there are, courses available that you can take online that will start to help you get there, right? And many organizations also have internal courses that they're organizing to get you there. That's one. The second thing is, like I said, understanding the use case. There are many examples where it's starting to show up, and there are also many examples where it doesn't work effectively. and understanding those and really focusing on understanding where things have worked and where things have not worked is a very critical piece to understanding if it is even effective for what you want to do with your product.
Okay, thanks, Ram. So, what are your suggestions for the product managers to reduce the time taken from ideation to launch, especially in a B2B setup?
Again, it's not about speed. I mean, speed is obviously important. I think in my mind, it's more about being in tune with understanding how your product is being received. And that starts even before you launch the product, right? I mean, if it's a V1 product and you're in the process of building it out or designing it or putting the strategy together, testing out, validating with customers is very critical. So there are some examples of how you can do this. One is, if you have a lot of existing customers, one of them is co-innovating with your customers, right? Making them part of the initial ideation process, and not just the customers, but also all the ecosystem that needs to come together, especially in B2B. Most solutions are not standalone. They need to work with other applications. So understanding your ecosystem, understanding your customers, and working with them early on to validate some of your assumptions is a good starting point, right? The second thing is, as you're developing the product, and instead of waiting for a big bang launch of the product sometime downstream, it's always a good idea to test again to validate your product and your solution with customers as you're building it, so that you're getting some of that feedback in real time coming back to you. The third is the launch process itself. Rather than having to launch the entire product in one shot, make it globally available or available to you in general availability. The other thing is opening the aperture slowly, right? Maybe start with a few customers, get it into their hands, see if it's working, watch that, and then open up the availability of the product to a larger audience. Now, that's for a more traditional on-prem type, product. Or now, if you're a SaaS product and you're building features in the product, maybe it's not a V1 product, but you're adding on some major piece of functionality. Again, it's an important piece where you're validating with your customers, and if it's purely online product, makes it a little easier to test out some of the new features through bucket testing and experimental infrastructure, if that allows you to do it. But keeping customers engaged through the development process has been one of the ways in which I and my teams have been successful in the past.
Okay, great insight, Ram. So the next question is all about, and there've been a lot of questions regarding this, because I think there are a lot of people who are from the GICs. So what are some of the opportunities for product managers who are managing a product from a GIC or an offshore, away from the real customers and users? So I think they are having a lot of challenges. So what do you think of are some of the opportunities for such product managers?
Look, I think I won't minimize the amount of effort it takes. Your customers are nowhere close to you, right? In a lot of cases, if that's the problem, there are ways in which you can get an understanding. One, first of all, I think you need to have access to your customers. It's very difficult to build a product in isolation, but it's not an unsolved problem. I mean, there are enough product management teams in India, for example, that are building global products sitting here. So one is travel. If your company and its budget allows you to go visit your customers, or at least be present where your customers are likely to be, maybe their conferences, maybe their internal conferences where your customers attend, it's a good starting point, right? Being able to go visit them, talk to them, and do that. Second, if you're lucky enough to have customers, global customers or global equivalent customers in India, being in tune with that and being in front of them and talking to them again is a very positive way of gaining that insight. Third, if it's a B2B product, a lot of times you have customer support teams, and good or bad, a lot of these customer support teams are built out in India as well. So if you have a customer support organization sitting next to you in your GIC, then that's a great learning opportunity, because they are touching customers on a daily basis. And a lot of good insight comes from either listening in on some of those calls with your product support teams, or at least sitting down and having conversations with some of the senior members of that organization to understand some of the challenges that they're seeing with products in the field that is coming in, right? It's a great way to actually learn about some of the things that's not working for your customers that you assume is working. So that's the if it's an internet-based product, makes things a little easier because you have a lot of data to work with. You can watch, you can if the product is well instrumented, you can actually follow the data to see what's going on with your product. There are ways of analyzing that data to get some insights into what's happening. For example, if you're trying to understand bottlenecks and process flows within your web-based application or mobile application, the product is instrumented, you can watch and see where people are getting stuck, right? Where is the drop-offs happening in the product? I've worked on large internet products before this, and that was a great insight for us to watch and see where are some of the product bottlenecks by just watching the user flow and the drop-offs, and where are things, where do customers drop off or where do they get stuck, and what is the time spent, for certain kinds of actions that they're taking. The So these are just some examples of things that you can do to gain an insight into customers. I think, and I'm sure there are other ones as well that maybe I missed out, but there are other ways of getting access and insight into what's happening with customers who may not be very close to where you are.
Okay, so the next question is how to make sure the product management and product marketing team work together. Where to draw the line in terms of responsibilities?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, for me, when I look at product marketing and product management functions, they are a continuum, right? And it's actually a very cyclical, and the screen and the slide that I have up on the screen kind of talks about that to a large extent, because and again, it changes company to company. I've worked in some organizations where there were even some other subdivisions, right? So there were product planning teams, there were product management teams, there were product marketing teams. In other companies I've worked in where product management did all of the functions. They did everything from conceptualizing the product, understanding the opportunity, to all the way out to working with sales and launch. So again, this changes from company to company. But the way I look at it is, this is the cycle of the product, and all these functional areas are important for us to do. So I think, to me, if you have two distinct roles, and let me just kind of give you an example. If you have two distinct roles of product management and product marketing, where I would expect product marketing, first of all, to get engaged is in really understanding macro factors that are opportunities that are coming up in the space in which the company operates, right? So they are watching, they're trying to understand some of the market requirements that are coming in, competitive analysis at a macro level, right? What's going on, where are customer cohorts emerging, what are new opportunities, who's satisfying it today, what is the unique abilities that the company has from a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, that can be utilized to actually come up with new businesses or grow a business in a particular area. Now, that information needs to flow into product management, because that starts to define what kind of a product you're going to build and for who. And that needs to starts getting sharpened in product management to then start defining the roadmaps and the feature level discovery, or writing the kind of the user stories if you're an agile methodology, and the epics, to start understanding and helping engineering try to understand how to start shaping the technology direction of the product. And then as you get closer to launching the product, or you are working towards that, again, then the partnership emerges between product management and product marketing to start to convert the product and the strategy that was defined and getting built into value statements for the customers to start thinking about, right? From a marketing perspective, from a sales perspective, and then also about pricing, monetization, all of those pieces. So I don't think this is a discontinuous process between product management and product marketing. And there's always touch points. But then the question is, who's taking point at which stage of the product lifecycle is the critical question. And that's how I would think about this in a longer sequence.
Okay. So how's the ownership balance today in terms of product management in MNCs? How much India owns versus the headquarters? How do we drive more ownership in it?
So it's very distinctly different between company to company. I'm not sure that there is a way for us to generalize an answer to that question. What I am seeing today, so I started building one of my first product management teams 10 years ago in India. And at that time, technology product management was not well understood, even among in the Indian ecosystem. So a lot of the teams that came together at that time were people who had moved back from other markets where they had worked as product managers. So they were experienced product managers who were just moving back into the country. The story today is very different. I think the role of a product manager is a software in the software realm, the digital realm, is well understood. I think you see this even in business schools. You see this in practicing product managers out there. I don't think the situation today is what it was 10 years ago. Where I do see some gaps, however, is on product marketing for digital. Product marketing again was a well-known function in areas like fast-moving consumer FMCGs and consumer markets in the past, but it hadn't quite developed in the Indian context because a lot of the GICs, which is where a lot of the early product managers came from, didn't have product marketing as a tier one function in their GICs in India. Now that is also changing. Many GICs in India are starting to include product marketing as a core function within the, within their organizations, in their local, in their Indian-based GICs. So I think, having said that, I think if I look at the broader ecosystem, product marketing skills still need to develop in India significantly more. But it's changing, and I think I'm quite positive that within the next few years, we'll have some very strong product marketing, digital product marketing people in the market, and others to learn from, and this will become another, good skill set that will start developing in this market.
What is preventing India from building the next Microsoft or Amazon for the world?
I'm not sure that's the right question to ask. I think the bigger question to ask here is where is the big opportunities emerging, not just in India, but other parts of the world? And what does that mean for us to move towards, right? What would be successful businesses that will satisfy those opportunities that are coming up? Now, that could result in another large, multi-billion-dollar or multi-trillion-dollar, hopefully, company that may emerge out of India. But I think the answer is not about what was built in the past and what will, it's really about what the future opportunities lie and how ready are we when we think about that from all the functions that are necessary to build successful business out of India for the world. And if that ingredient comes together well, I think we will see very large businesses getting built out of here. We are already seeing some great examples of Indian startups, stretching themselves across geographies, and I think that's very positive. And and I would say those people coming out of those companies will then have experiences now and the confidence to go broader. So I think over time that will develop.
How can we make a differentiated product in a market where features are open to be copied and pricing seems to be the only differentiator?
Well, I think there is an element of understanding your customers at a level of depth and their changing preferences. Now, it's there are some businesses where which are more commoditized, where copycatting each other or copying features or experiences from each other is okay, but then the differentiator there becomes pricing. But if you really want very differentiated products that are that have stickiness with customers, I think it's a very broad set of things that need to be looked at. It's not just about the product. It's about the entire experience as a customer comes and interfaces with the company. Because a lot of times the weakest link in that chain is not necessarily the product, but some other type of experience. Maybe it's customer experience, right? They have a great experience with the product, but the moment something goes wrong and they have to touch a different part of the organization, something doesn't work. So I think, to me, I think when we think about successful product companies are those that give a great experience to the consumer or to the customer from the first time they touch the company to to their life cycle of that customer. And I think that is a massive opportunity to think about, not just if you're a product marketing person or a product manager, to really think about the entire life cycle of the customer's engagement with the organization and are we making that experience as best as possible. If you do that, I think successful companies will emerge. It's not about copying skills. Those are the harder ones to actually to not be able to those are the barriers to entry for a lot of things. Because if the customer is really happy with the company as a whole, they don't necessarily go look for something else. So I think those are the ways that you can actually build a successful long-term engagement with your customers and keep them in your fold.
What are some of the top skills to acquire to scale up in this product-focused market?
I think there are some soft skills which are very critical. Personally, it's about listening skills, ability to understand your customers at a level below the obvious. Some of the best products that get built are those that are built for unstated need rather than something that the customer is actually telling you. So I think to me personally, it's about listening skills, having the ability to listen, analyze, and then pick out what they believe is the actual problem and not necessarily what is being stated. So that's one, personally. I think I look for that, both in, for myself and for the people that I work with. The second set of skills is the ability to look beyond the obvious. A lot of times, again, listening is one part to your customers, but looking around the customer. What else is going on, right? I mean, what are the customers? What are the pain points, and who else is satisfying themselves, today? And can you do it 10x better, right? Can you come up with something which is 10x better than what the customer is experienced with today? And that could be a formula for success, right? So the ability to look beyond the obvious, having a point of view, critical analytical skills, not just with numbers, but also with observation, is again a very critical piece. Third is immerse yourself into the data. I mean, what else is going on? What are you seeing? How to analyze the information that you're looking at, and be able to derive insights out of it. The fourth is communication skills. I mean, the ability to communicate both internally with your audience as well as externally with your customers and potential customers is again a very good skill to have. And you might have noticed that none of these have anything to do with technology or anything else. Now, fifth would be technology. Really understanding the technologies that you work with that are emerging at a level of depth below the superficial. That doesn't mean the expectation is product managers and product marketing managers are writing code, right? That's not the obvious leap. But you have to understand your ecosystem of your technology really well. You have to understand platforms on which your products are running. You have to understand how platforms really work, even if you're building an application or if your solution is an application. You have to understand how the underlying platforms are operating, because at some point your applications would need to make use of those platforms. So understanding technology at a level of depth is really critical to understand, how to think about successful products and customer offerings for the future. So those would be some few things that I can think of off the top of my head.
How do you decide when to kill a product, B2B versus B2C?
Yeah. So unfortunately, there is no magic formula for that. Few things that could happen, right? One is the customers are moved on. You may still be making money, but may at a reducing rate for let's say a cash cow type product. The customers have moved on, their expectations have moved on. New opportunities have emerged where the resources that you're spending on keeping a product going may be better utilized. The strategy of the company may have shifted. You were trying to do one thing at a certain point in time. The company is now focused on something else, and the product portfolio doesn't fit, right? And it's consuming too many resources for the returns that you're getting out of that product and the customer engagement that it's having. So there are various examples of this sort. Personally, I think culling products is very critical, because engineering resources are the most scarce resources that you have in any company, from a product company. And utilizing that engineering resource, the best utilization of that resource is the number one job of product management, is to make sure that the engineering resources are working towards things that will deliver the most amount of value for the company. And if that is not happening, I think it's time to relook at your product to see whether it's worth keeping around or not.
What kind of intervention can industry bodies like NASSCOM or private institutions do to make India world-class in product management?
I think NASSCOM is already doing a lot. I mean, the NASSCOM Product Council and the NPC, the conference and the mini conferences that happen around India, webinars like this, is creating forums where people can get together, talk about these things, both existing practitioners who are trying to sharpen their skills, or new people, or people who would like to get into some of these functions and trying to understand how this works. I think creating those forums itself is a great starting point. Second thing is, I think creating some of the mini user groups or self-interest groups that can be created around not just the big centers like Bangalore, etc., but really across India. There are a lot of emerging pockets in smaller towns which are becoming technology hubs. I mean, we are seeing some great examples of companies that are starting to emerge from not necessarily the large metros, and being able to take these to those smaller towns, especially where some of these newer companies are emerging, I think would be another area which could be the industry bodies could actually play a role in helping that to happen. And then exposure, right? Bringing in a lot more market data, aggregating it, making it available, the ability to create platforms where data can be aggregated and made available in one of the big challenges in India is not finding more market centric information, right? It's very hard to find market data which is reliable. The industry bodies can play a role there in actually aggregating a lot of that data and making it available to companies. So I think there are various, and then of course, last but not least is policy, right? I mean, even today we saw the fact that angel tax on small on startups is a detraction, right, from what that startup is trying to do, and keeps the founders from focusing on their customers and building a business to dealing with a lot of governmental policy issues. Now that's another role where the industry bodies can come in and actually free up people to focus on what they do best and let the others worry about the rest of it.
Often product management and sales function overlap. Can you specifically mention which are those sales specific key performance indicators in which product management is not primary, but maybe a secondary owner?
Well, obviously the revenue number itself, unless you are a SaaS company where the product is selling itself, right? In more traditional sales organizations, the revenue metric is not owned by product management, though a lot of work that they do is towards that. But having said that, I think product management and product marketing can play a very, very key role in helping preparing their sales force to actually go sell their product much more effectively to their customers, which means that they are also engaged with customers, really listening in on what the customers are asking for, and help the sales teams, position the product well for those opportunities that are emerging from customer perspective. Having said that, I think there are very key metrics that product management and needs to be tracking. For example, customer acquisition, customer retention. Can those be eased up, right? For example, on acquisition front, can you make your products easier to deploy? Especially in enterprise, there is a notion of shelfware, especially on on-prem products, where customers buy your product as part of a licensing agreement, but don't deploy it. Now, nobody gets help out of the customers not using your product. So product managers can play a key role working with their sales organizations in helping ensure that deployments happen, right? So customers really understand the value of the product, the features that it has, and how it can help them, and hence roll out the product in a way in which the sales organizations, when they go for license renewals, it's an easier conversation to have with customers about the value derived. So there's a lot of areas where product management and product marketing can play a very key role with sales, where they don't necessarily own closing the deal at the last mile.
How important is the domain experience to switch jobs in product management?
Domain experience towards product management. Is that the question?
Yeah, to switch jobs in product management. I think somebody's looking to switch jobs.
Well, the way I look at it, I think there are some independent vectors that need to be looked at when you think about product management. Or it applies to most domain functions. I mean, in most of these specialized roles. One is functional skills, right? And you gain functional skills. That is, when I say functional skills, I'm talking about the mechanics and the nuts and bolts of being a good product manager. Now, that is about that you learn on the job, right? I mean, even though a lot of people go to business school, etc., product management is an apprentice function in the sense that you learn by doing. Most product managers learn by watching other product managers operate. They work in an organization which has maybe a few product managers, some who have more experience than they do, and they learn and they practice and they get better at it. So one vector is the functional skill of being a product manager, right? And all the things that goes with it. There's another piece which is the domain itself. And I've known some really good product managers who've been able to switch domains. Now, there are a few domains that are completely different. I mean, you could be in software domain today, but tomorrow you want to go work in healthcare. The good news is, and this is where the crux of my talk today was about, is the fact that every business today is starting digital teams, which means it's about software. And so if you've been a software product manager in one domain, the domain may be new to somebody, but the fact that they're building a product team, which is a software driven product team, is a skill that they may already have, and they can come back to that one, right? So that makes it easier to transition. Now, you still have to learn the domain, right? It doesn't matter where you are. You could be a B2C product manager working on media products, and tomorrow you go work for a deep infrastructure company. You have to learn about that domain, right? You need to understand, and domain means there are specific technology trends within a domain area. You need to understand your customers. You need to understand the business in which you're operating. You need to understand how the overall ecosystem operates, and that's what you really mean by domain. And those skills, if you've worked on sufficient number of diverse products, making that transition is not necessarily hard. It's not easy, but it's not impossible either. Now, if you're making a transition, now the other angle to this is you're making a transition from a different function. Let's say you're in engineering or you're in QE or something else, and you want to move into product management. Now, there I think it is again feasible, but you may need an intervention to help you through that process. Either there is an opportunity in the organization itself where you get to work on a side project perhaps with some product manager on learning what happens, and then eventually get comfortable with the role and be able to transition. The other way to do this is people go get a certification or a degree that allows them to make that transition from one function to another. So these are two different areas or ways of transitioning that I can think of.
What is the next wave of digital transformation?
I think it's more of deepening. Like I said, like I mentioned it earlier, I don't know if it's the next wave of digital transformation. I think it's just the next incarnation or just the next transition from one phase to the next. A lot of companies have been experimenting, trying to understand how digital operates within their companies and our digital experiences. But a lot of it has been in pockets. So, for example, a few months ago, I was talking to a chief digital officer of a clothing retail company, right? And they had built applications for their field staff to use. So this is they do bespoke tailoring, and they had built digital applications for their traditional, tailor in the shop and for their shop assistants to work on, to use, instead of their traditional tape measure and writing on dimensions of a person in a notebook. But what they found was that the uptake was very low. And when they dug in a little bit, they found that they didn't spend time. They built all the applications, but they didn't spend time in retraining their workforce on how effectively to use those applications. And so people went back to what they knew best, which was a tape measure with a notebook. So people, I think there's a lot of experimentation that has started happening, in the sense that people have tried these kind of things, learned from it, went back to the drawing board and said, okay, it's not just about building digital applications. They need to bring their workforce, business process, think about all of that continuing as a single group in terms of transition that needs to happen, rather than only one thing. So I think the next phase of digital transformation in my mind would be now companies reworking business process, looking deeply internally to understand how they need to restructure themselves, and the next wave of applications, so that all of these pieces come together to make that transition happen and give their customers better experiences, create new business models, or even just drive operational efficiency internally in the company.
How can product marketers shape the way the product teams are built and the way they function?
I don't know about build, but I think where product marketers have a very strong role to play is bringing market context, customer context, competitive context to the product teams and help shape their thinking around it, right? So I think that's a very key role that product marketing can play on the front end. On the second half, which is actually, I won't even say second half, it's while the product is getting built, being very thoughtful about how the product, how to take the product strategy and convert that into positioning statements for the market, working with customers in understanding how they would view the product if it is when it's going to be, when it's going to be launched, the messaging around it, being very, very thoughtful about, what would land well with customers, the business model around the product. For example, your company could have a sales force that is used to selling a certain kind of product set. You're bringing in a new product, and the sales force doesn't know what to do with it. So go to market is not just about pricing the product. Obviously, you have to figure out how to price the product, but it's also about how does it fit into existing processes, or what new processes need to be developed on the sales motion side to take the product to market successfully. Now, if you're an industrial company and you're building a software product, you have no idea what to do with this. And I think product marketing needs to play that pivotal role in taking that product through the sales motion of that company and make it successful. So product marketing has got a absolutely huge impact on the shaping the thinking and the product, and also on how to make that product successful in the market.
What are useful KPIs to track for product managers in the B2B space?
I don't think they're very different than what they would track in a B2C space. Yes, there are a few nuances, but at the end of the day, it's about customer acquisition, like I said earlier. It's about retention. It is about looking at what are some of the new requests coming in, where do you need to streamline the product, what are revenue metrics what are the input metrics to revenue looking like, unit sales, regional sale, where is it selling, not selling, understanding what is happening with a product in the field. And those are the whatever those metrics that to translate for that particular organization needs to be looked at very, very closely.
What perspectives should be considered while entering into a mature market with multiple products and competitors, vis-a-vis entering into new market with low competition but minimalistic market insights?
I think that can be a half a day discussion by itself, but off the top of my head, I would say, well entrenched products. Now the question is, you have to really think through whether are you going to be commoditizing that market in a way in which you bring all the prices down, you go underneath everybody else that's a competitor in the market, or are you going to go premium, right? In the way in which your competitors are not able to tap into a certain segment of the market that may be more premium than where they are serving that. So it changes by the product, it changes by the market, it changes by the the area of the market that you're going after. So the entering an entrenched market sometimes can be looked at as a hard problem, but if the market is still growing in its early days, or at least it's not fully matured, there is opportunities to think through what seam that you want to exploit within the market that will get you either grab market share as it's growing, or grab market share from your other competitors. Now, if the market's not growing at all, right, if it's a very stagnant market, but it has very large entrenched competitors, you need to look for either trends in the market that you can exploit. Are there something changing in that market that others are not seeing? They're so legacy in the market that they are not able to react fast enough to some newer changes that are coming. And we see a lot of that nowadays, right? I mean, you see that with startups, which are able to come in and exploit a market. I mean, we saw that with the ride-hailing applications that came into a very mature market where taxis were operating, and that had been not changed in years, right? And they came in with a different business model and a different value proposition that completely changed the dynamics of that market. So again, you have to look very carefully about what is happening in that market dynamics of a well-entrenched market. Now, a new market has its own challenges, right? If it's a new market underpenetrated, the question is the market even ready for you? Or do you need to shape the thinking of the market and bring the customers along with you on the journey? And we saw that in the early days of e-commerce in India, where a lot of the market shaping and market creation had to happen by the e-commerce companies, and they spent a lot of money doing that just to get people to change habit, right? And I think that's a challenge. But if the market is moving and it's growing and there's a way to actually tap into it, the that's a huge opportunity for the first mover to get in and make a market out of it. So like I said, these are much deeper conversation. It almost needs to be talked about with case studies to understand, how do you look at this strategy for an entrenched markets versus emerging markets.
How can companies get the product management talent they need?
So, like I mentioned, if you're looking at it from an India lens, the product management talent now in the market is actually quite good, right? You're able to find people in various levels of experience in product management. If you're looking to hire senior people, they're available. If you're looking for, new MBA graduates that you want to bring in and get them going, I think they exist, right? So that is one. But to attract them, you need to have a value proposition that is real, right? That means that you are in market spaces that where they feel, and not just the market space, you have a culture in the company that will allow them to come in and be successful. And I think that is very critical to create an atmosphere where product managers, feel that they can come in and be successful. Otherwise, it's hard to attract them to come in and do that because they tend to be people with more experience. So they're very quick at grasping the fact that are you really serious about, building that function within your organization and making it successful or not. And there's enough opportunities out there for them to go do something else.
So the last question for the day, what role does organization culture play in nurturing good product managers?
Very, very critical. I think some of the cultural tenets that I look to foster within the organizations I work in. One is a culture of experimentation. Is the fact that you are willing to try out something new and not get penalized for it, right? A lot of organizations, have a culture where it's about pure execution, right? You've been told to do something, go do it, right? Don't lift your head and look beyond that. I think that is not a good culture for fostering a great product organization. Okay, I'm not just saying product management. I think even engineering requires a certain amount of capacity to experiment and try out new things and learn. Second, I think it needs to be an organization which is learning. They're willing to be proven wrong, right? They're willing to go out there, put themselves out there, and look for opportunities to learn from customers, learn from competitors, learn from others in this field or who are adjacent to them, and not come in with the attitude that they have all the answers. And I think that again is a very key ingredient to build a great product organization, right? Having a learning culture. Third, willing to look at work that you've already done, not so fall in love with what you're doing that you can't handle criticism, right? I think criticism is a great learning opportunity, from your customers, from others, who are well-wishers in the ecosystem, and be willing to go back to the drawing board to look at what you've been working on and how you can reshape it better. So I think that is another cultural tenet, which is because is willing to having a listening atmosphere and open atmosphere to bring in new thoughts, ideas, and feedback back into the organization and work on it. I think these are a few cultural tenets that I like to build in my organizations, and I've also known friends and peers who foster that kind of culture in their organizations, and those organizations are indeed doing well.
Thanks a lot, Ram, for your wonderful insights. Over to you, Ankita.
Yes. Thank you, Ram. And I'm grateful for the time and effort you took to share your perspective on product management and marketing in the age of digital transformation. It was very interesting to hear about your experience in product marketing. Also, I would like to thank everyone for your participation in asking interesting questions. It was an amazingly interactive session. I would like to inform all of you that we are formally starting our series from 10th of January. That'll be our first episode. Stay tuned. We'll share all the updates at the earliest. See you soon. Thanks, Ram. Thanks, everyone, once again.
Thank you.